Well, thank you very much, and thank everybody for coming out. I'm an archaeologist, and I've worked primarily in Central America. And I'll just start with a story or two that will help illustrate this theme of survival. It had been raining all day, probably raining all week. And I was on the coast of Honduras, and we were going upriver. I was with a Honduran colleague of mine, another archaeologist, and we were going to go upriver to do a project. We'd gotten a ride on one of these cargo canoes that they use on these rivers. They're long dugout canoes with outboard motors. And the captain said, well, we know where you're staying because it's a tiny village, so we'll come get you early to start this trip. Well, they came, knocked on our door about midnight, which I thought, this isn't even early yet, but so we got out there to the canoe. It was loaded up with sacks of sugar and flour, and we sort of positioned ourselves on top of these dugout canoes are not very steady, and it was so loaded down that there was only a few inches of the canoe above the water. And I thought, this is kind of precarious, but surely they know what they're doing. The river was flooded, it was rainy season, so we started upriver, and it was dark, of course, and the captain had a little flashlight that he was trying to find obstacles. And pretty quickly we hit some submerged tree and took on a bunch of water, and now there's about an inch above the water. And my Honduran colleague, Fancho, was in front of me, and he looked around, really accusingly, like it was all my fault that this was happening. And he's, so I get out my flashlight to help the captain see, because it was more powerful, I guess. And as I was sort of helping him look for obstacles, I noticed that all along the bank were these red eyes reflecting back. And I thought, those cannot be crocodiles. And of course they were crocodiles. I saw one swimming a little closer and saw its head, and I thought, well, they have to be small crocodiles, don't they? I mean, there are so many that they can't be big, right? If there were, they would be starving, and suddenly that was not a positive thought anymore. And so about that time, we hit another submerged log, and we started taking on more water, and Fancho turned around looking at me again, my fault, apparently, and said, these guys don't know what they're doing. And I'm like, no, it'll be fine. They do this all the time. I'm sure it'll be fine. And I was interrupted, though, by the captain saying, we're sinking. And Fancho looked back, and his expression changed, and he looked at me and said, I can't swim. And I thought, okay. It's the middle of the night. We're in the rainforest. It's raining. River's flooded. Canoe sinking. There's crocodiles, and he can't swim. I thought, okay, I can deal with that. The thing, though, that was really sort of the last straw was that in between us was a duffel bag that had all of our data from the last month or two, all of our equipment. I thought, I cannot lose this. And so I was thinking, surely if we sink, surely to God he can flail around for a few seconds, right? Well, I deal with that, and then, But at any rate, that was probably the time sort of in my career when I started to think about survival. And I want to, I guess, just think a little bit about what that means, what that is, and how you do it. One of the things that dawned on me as I worked as an archaeologist, and then later as I took a variety of types of groups through the rainforest, students or other scientists or diplomats or whoever wanted sort of a trip through there, is that there was a lot of misconceptions about what we were doing, and there was a lot of anxiety about the place that we were. And there was a lot of ideas about what it means to survive in these sort of remote areas. I remember I had a group of students, and this one particular student would come up sort of every day and say, something bit me. And I was like, it's the rainforest. You know, when there are lots of things, they bite each other. And, you know, and the next day she came up and said, something bit me and, you know, my hand's tingly. And I'm like, okay, well, let's see where that goes. The next day is like, something bit me and half my mouth is swollen up or something. And I was like, look, there's just nothing here that causes that, all right? You know, there's just some places in the world where you have, you know, mosquitoes that carry diseases and ticks that have incurable viruses and venomous snakes and venomous spiders that are problematic and scorpions. And she was like, that's a no. I said, I'm talking about Kentucky. You know, I said, here, there's no Lyme disease, you know, you're good, you're going to be fine. But part of the idea is that we have this sense of these areas as these, you know, geographies of danger, these heroic landscapes, that it takes some special talent to get through. And the one thing that occurred to me as I worked there is that a lot of what we think of as survival skills and what I'll teach when I teach survival, wilderness survival courses, are really what people do every day. Starting a fire, gathering firewood, you know, and I often wonder, what would these people think if, well, when they see this? It would be a little bit like us seeing a survival course somewhere that, you know, included like unloading the dishwasher and, you know, mowing the grass. You know, it would be like, really? That's something you have to learn? But and there's also, you know, and this stems a lot, of course, from the colonial history of a lot of these places, even words like jungle. You know, if you look at the origin of this word, it comes from colonial history in India, and these end up being really problematic sort of concepts. I've had people come up and say, you know, I'm not very good at camping and hiking and that stuff. And, you know, to which I'll always respond, look, camping is sleeping. Hiking is walking. You can't not be proficient at that. You know, there's an industry that wants to sell you things, and there are people that want to present themselves as heroic by surviving these things, but in reality, it's not quite like that. The second thing that I've sort of observed or thought about is how is it that you do survive these situations that are problematic? And I'll tell you one story that sort of illustrates this point. And the way that you really survive them is just solve the immediate problem, and then you solve the next problem, and then you solve the next problem. And like we see, you know, there was a quote from one of these Apollo 13 or The Martian or something, you know, solve enough problems and you get to come home. And in this case, we had been walking for about a week, going to one of the more remote parts of the rainforest in Honduras. And I was with 6 guys from the village that I'd been living in for about a year. And as we were about a day away from our objective, we ran into some people way out there that were illegally clearing part of the forest. These were a bunch of guys, and they were armed with assault rifles and such, which is not really that unusual in these sort of frontier situations, but something was off about these guys. And anyway, we passed by them, went upriver, and set up camp. And later that night, just as we were making camp, this other guy came by and talked to me for a bit, and then talked to the other guys, and I heard him splash off across the river and leave. And a few minutes later, one of my colleagues there came up and said, "Chris, we have to leave. We have to leave right now." And I've seen these guys in many situations and never seen them scared, and this guy was terrified. And I think partly what he was scared of was that I wouldn't actually realize what was happening or realize the seriousness of the situation. And I said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "He's going to go get those guys, and they'll come back, and they'll kill all of us." And I said, "Well, why? What makes you think that?" And he said, "Well, he told us." And I said, "Okay." And that really was all I needed. But But he says also he knew who it was, and it was as if you'd run into Jesse James. They knew who this guy was. It was, the legendary Rene who was holed up out in the rainforest. And so I said, okay, yeah, let's leave. And I said, well, do we go on? He said, no, that's it. Trip over. We're going home because that's where he is. We can't go there. And I said, all right. And so in this case, there were many problems to solve. One was that I knew they were faster than we were. We had been walking for a week and had a lot of equipment, food, and such. And they didn't. They were living out here and we weren't. And we just could not outrun them. And so we left and we thought, well, let's walk upriver, a direction we're not actually going, and leave some footprints. And we did that until we got to an area that was rocky and it was plausible that you would lose the trail. Then we got in the river and we walked in the river for about an hour. This was after packing everything up in silence and in darkness because we weren't sure really where this guy had gotten to. I walked up the river so that we wouldn't leave any footprints, and then we got out into the rainforest and went overland, sort of looping back around to where the trail was, where we'd come from. And there's really only two ways we had come, and we were hoping, well, that will fool them, and if they do follow us, then they'll go this other direction. There were some unexpected issues there, and one of them is when you walk in the rainforest or anywhere where your clothes are wet, it rubs your skin raw. And so usually after the end of walking for 10 hours a day, everything sort of hurts, but you heal up overnight and you're all right. Well, we had really only had a couple of hours before we started it all over. So by about 3 o'clock in the morning, I just couldn't take it anymore. And I told the guys, I'm taking my pants off. And in fact, everything from my waist down except my boots. And everybody else said, yeah, God, me too. And so there was then this moment where there were like, 6 guys walking through the jungle with no pants on, which may be a unique image. I'm sure you could find one. And at any rate, we got through that. We got to the point where it was about to be daylight, and we had used up nearly all our batteries for our flashlights. And remember, we had another week to get home. It wasn't like we were going to be home after this. And so we thought, well, we need to conserve some of these batteries because it'd be nice to be able to see at night for the next week. And so we decided, well, let's wait a second. We'll stop. We'll rest until the sun comes up. And we did that, and at that point we were faced with really the hardest part of the walk, where we had to go up over the end of the watershed, a really steep part of the mountain, to a ridge and down into the next watershed. We'd walked about 20 hours already that day, so everybody was exhausted and sore and didn't want to naked and didn't really want to do that. And then at that point, we heard all of this automatic weapon fire down from where our camp was, which really wasn't that far away since we'd made this big circle. And so they had showed back up in the morning and either thought we were there, or I don't know why they were doing that, but it was clear that it was some response to us. And that motivated us to get over the mountain. And so we got really as far as we could, and we sort of made camp. And I remember laying there in the hammock, just waiting. We didn't know, are they coming this way? Are they going to show up? And in a movie, you would have made some clever plan, right, to ambush these guys and all that. And we were just exhausted, and there was just nothing was going to work. And we decided, well, if they show up, we'll all run in different directions, and maybe they won't get everybody. And I think also I didn't make a very good plan, because most of the day I was thinking I could have gone to law school. And none of this would be happening to me then. So at any rate, they didn't show up, and we made it back and all that. But it dawned on me that sort of step-by-step problem solving is sort of really what you have to do. And then another sort of issue with this idea of survival is, of course, what it means to survive and how you know you've survived. Is it because you're still breathing? If that's it, I've got a 100% success rate, and so do all of you. But I want to tell this one story I think that really captures something about these situations that comes out, and this is a story about my wife, Sarita, who many of you know. When we met in Honduras and started going out, she lived in a little village on the edge of the rainforest working for the Honduran Forest Service, and I was back in the capital normally. And so if we were going to see each other, we would meet in one of the towns on the coast of Honduras, La Ceiba, typically. And we would each fly in on one little bush plane and, meet each other and then head back after a couple of days or whatever. And the only way that we could communicate was by long-range radio. I imagine they were VHF marine-type radios. And every village would have one of these radios at some sort of central public place. And many villages were on the same frequency. So it was like a party line. Everybody's listening to your call. And it was a little scandalous to do that. So, we would come up with this, goofy code that I'm sure didn't fool anybody. Like, did you go to La Ceiba last week? Yes, I went on Tuesday. Are you sure you didn't go on Wednesday? No. Thursday? Okay. And so we'd meet on Thursday or whatever. But at any rate, we were to meet in La Ceiba, and I got there, and it was in the morning, and her flight was supposed to arrive about the same time, and it didn't. I waited around at the little airport, and then I went to my hotel, and there was a message. And it said, call her at this hotel in this town between where she was coming from and where we were to meet. It was at a place that sort of served as the little airport there. And I called, and she said, yeah, there was a problem with the plane, and they're sending another one, so I'm not going to be there till noon. And I said, all right, well, I'll just meet you here. And we sort of made plans. And as an afterthought, I just asked, well, what was the problem with the plane? She said, I don't know, brakes maybe or something. We landed and couldn't stop and bounced across this field and hit some trees. And I'm like, what? Was anybody hurt? And he's like, not really. I mean, it broke one of the wings off. And at which point I was just thinking, that's not a problem with the plane. That's a plane wreck. And it occurred to me later that if you could turn your plane wrecks into there was some problem with the plane, that you probably have it figured out somewhere. And I think that was maybe the moment that sort of sealed the deal. At any rate, for me, that sort of illustrated this idea of survival. And often, in many cases, what we think of as these dramatic, extreme situations are really not nearly as dramatic or extreme as we think about. And what constitutes these survival skills, or what constitutes surviving, is really what people go through on a daily basis in lots of places. Well, thank you very much, and I'll take any questions if you have any.